thank you all for coming out. We are very honored to have Dr. Anthony Barrand here, Tony Barrand, a truly great singer of traditional ballads and songs, as well as a repository of folklore, an authority on Morris dancing and other forms of traditional dance and seasonal customs. I'll just say a few things in my scattered notes here, based on talking to Tony in the last 2 days. He came over to the States as an exchange student to Swarthmore College, and he was studying psychology, this was in the 60s, and philosophy, and ended up going into grad school at Cornell in the psychology program. And on his first day there, I believe, he met John Roberts, another fantastic singer who's also English.
He's also English from
Yes.
Birmingham.
Yes, and the two of them met, and as it turned out, they were both singers. And John Roberts happened to have a large collection of reel-to-reel recordings of traditional ballads. And so this was Tony's catalyst for getting into this music. And he had always heard music as a youngster growing up. His parents were both singers, although more of the church variety rather than the late-night pub variety.
They were Salvationists.
And so John and Tony started performing not that long after that, and they've been doing it ever since for 44 years now. In the mid-70s, they formed the group Noel Sing We Clear with a few other people, which some of you may have seen, who do Yuletide, Christmas time performances, but also have done recordings and performances based on seasonal customs at other times of the year. Tony became a teacher at Marlborough College in southern Vermont, and teaching in the psychology department at first, but this coalesced with his interest in traditional music and traditional dance. He saw Morris dancing for the first time here in the States, in Plymouth, Massachusetts, is that right?
Yeah, Plymouth, right.
He had never, by sort of a conspiracy of circumstances, he had never seen traditional dance in England to speak of, but he saw it here, which is an interesting thing. And he described this as being a moment like Paul had on the road to Damascus. Turned his life around, and he became obsessed with this music and studied it, learned it, or the dance, studied it, learned it, eventually taught it, formed Morris groups, started the Marlborough Morris Ale, and has continued to do that over the years. He's written books on this, he's made many recordings, he's performed in his psychology classes. He started teaching the students the songs and the dances, and he said he was very interested in this matrix of the culture between these seasonal festivals, the songs, and the dance, and how it all comes together also with the mind and what the people are thinking. So I won't go on and on here, but I would like to just Tony Barrand, and I will confess that one of the reasons I wanted to organize this, I've seen him perform a number of times, is I think we have a real treat to hear him in a room like this with no amplification and not a big crowd, a very intimate setting, and I think this is going to be very special. So thanks to Tony for coming.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I figured if Norman Kennedy can fill the room.
He pays us to come.
Yeah. Yeah, he asked what I was going to sing, and I said, Norman Kennedy songs. You know, and he said, well, you could do worse. Like. Yeah. That's truly awesome. Well, actually, you mentioned my dad. I'll start with a song that I learned from my father. Both sides of my family were Salvation Army people, and that's instructive in terms of the song I'm going to sing that I learned from him, because it involves the devil and other things. But you know, when you think about it, in various religions, there are all sorts of strange, we could call them supernatural events. You know, there's one religion that's pretty well known that has some guy who was crucified and 3 days later, was, returned to life again and rolled the stone away, or the angels did, and that's, we just passed that time of year. So it's one of the things I say it that way just because very typically in a lot of American folk song, the supernatural piece is often missing from songs, but I'm going to sing a lot of songs from New England and Canada as well as English ones. Yeah, we're going to try and cover all the different kinds. But the other thing that singing this song does for me, I don't have anywhere near the kind of a interesting heritage that Norman had learning his songs, but after I'd learned this song from my dad and then became sort of a folklorist, I discovered that it was actually a version of the song from Virginia. And I said to my dad, when going back one time, "Where did you learn that song?" "From a Pete Seeger record," he said. And that's who we are now, right? I mean, that may be the best we can do. So there'll be a bit of a chorus you can sing with me. There was an old man lived under the hill. If he hasn't moved out, he's a living there still. Come a hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. He hitched his horse and cow to the plow, plowed that land, the devil knows how. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Oh, please don't take my eldest son for the work on the farm, and it's got to be done. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Well, it's all I want, that wife of yours. Well, you can have her with all of my heart. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. So he hitched the old woman up onto his back, and off to hell he went clickety-clack. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Now the devil he stopped at a fork in the road, said, "Old woman, you're a hell of a load." Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. And when they got to hell's main gate, there he made the old woman walk straight. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Here's two little devils with a ball and chain. She up with her foot and she kicked out their brains. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Now there's 9 little devils running over the wall, saying, "Take it back, daddy, she'll murder us all." Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Now the old man sitting looking out of a crack, saw the old devil come bringing her back. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. He said, "Here's your wife, both sound and well. If I kept her there longer, she'd have torn up hell." Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Now that only goes to show what a woman can do. She can whoop out the devil and her husband too. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. I last saw the old woman going over the hill. If the devil won't have me, I wonder who will. Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. And that proves that the women are worse than the... At which point my mother would hit or kick my father. And he'd say, "That proves that the women are better than the men. They can go down to hell and get sent back again." Hi-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I-fi, diddle-I, diddle-I day. Yeah, all right. Thank you for singing. Good work. Good. Now, I'm not sure exactly where I learned this next one, but it was when I was quite young. I don't know whether I learned it from my father or mother, maybe, or from school. We learned a lot of folk songs in English schools, in what would be elementary school, if you like. at that age. Anyway, and I'm not sure it was this version, because I probably polished this version up a little, but it had a line at the end of the song that is where the title for the talk came from. You'll see it when we get there. It's sometimes called The False Bride, and I always knew it as the week before Easter, which was a significant time, as you'll hear, because of the costume. He sees his true love all dressed in white, and that seems obvious what that means, but it doesn't. The week before Easter, when I was growing up, was a time when you wore white clothes, which contrasted with what was called Black Friday. Why it's called Good Friday, I don't know, probably just good, holy men, but Black Friday, people wore white during the week before Easter, and I think that's why the white appears, but you'll see. Let's go to it. The week before Easter, the morn bright and clear, the sun it shone brightly and keen blowed the air. I went to the forest to gather fine flowers, but the forest won't yield me no roses. The roses are red, love, and the leaves they are green. The bushes and briars are a pleasure to be seen, and the small birds are singing and arranging their notes all among the wild beasts in the forest. Well, the first time I saw my love, she was dressed all in white, in robes of white linen, a fair dazzled my sight. And I thought to myself, well, I might have been that man, but she's gone to be wed to another. And the parson that married them, aloud he did cry, all you that forbid it, I'd have you stand nigh. And I thought to myself, I've a good reason why, but I had not the heart to forbid it. And the next time I saw my love, she did in the church stand, with a ring on her finger and a glove in her hand. And I thought to myself, well, I might have been that man, but she's gone to be wed to another. And the last time I saw my love, she was sat down to dine. I sat down beside her and I poured out the wine. And I drank to the lassie that should have been mine. But she's gone and she's wed to another. The men in yon forest, they ask it of me, how many wild strawberries grow in the salt sea. And I ask it them back with a tear in my eye, how many dark ships in the forest. Go dig me a grave, dig it long, wide, and deep, aye, and cover it over with flowers so sweet, so I can lie down there and take a long sleep, and that's the best way to forget her. Thank you. I said to my wife before we started driving up here, I sang I sing at nursing homes in Brattleboro, and I sang it too during the last few days, and I sang a lot of these songs, but They're pretty dark and intense. So I quickly had to sing something else, you know. But I know some verses to take me out to the ball game, which we could do. That's a winner. They like that in the old people's homes. The other thing that is important and makes a contribution here, what a great line, how many dark ships in the forest. It's just fancy. I wondered about that a lot when I was little. You know, it's like, what on earth does that mean? And they clearly, all the songs that have this piece of mystery in them, in which there is a shape change, in which there are ghosts, in which there are demons. I mean, you count them all. Those are the dark ships in the forest. And it's pretty interesting. The other thing going on for me when I was little was Rudyard Kipling, who, of course, I moved to Brattleboro and ran into Rudyard Kipling again, who lived there for 4 years in the 1890s because he married an American woman by the last name of Balestier. And the only real problem was that his brother-in-law lived next door. And that ended up making him move back to England, among some other reasons. But anyway, Kipling wrote a number of things that I either was read to or read myself when I was little. Among them, I don't know whether they're among his best-known books. They're probably not. And they're sort of children's books, but, you know, like Harry Potter, they're children's books that in some ways are really for grown-ups or for adults. And there are two of them that I highly recommend. One is called Puck of Pook's Hill, and then the second one is Rewards and Fairies. And Kipling writes about the history of England by taking these two children who are 10 and 11 or 10 and 12, something like that, a boy and a girl, and he takes them back through time by using the power of the leaves of oak, ash, and thorn, which are trees that appear over and over again throughout the folkloric tradition in the English language, and probably in other languages too. But anyway, he wrote a poem, a song, to go with each of the stories. Kipling really knew the English folk song tradition well. So a lot of people have suspected, and I suspect true from my own knowledge of Kipling, that he had a song in mind on many of these poems. I actually did a count of his something like 531 poems. And more than 50% have the word hymn, song, ballad in the title, for example, or they actually have the form of an English or British folk song with a verse and chorus, and then a different verse, same chorus comes up. Not typical for what you would want to do necessarily with poetry, but it probably indicates that he had a tune in mind. He was born in Mumbai, we call it. And he hung out with the British soldiers of what we would now call the Occupation Army, and heard the songs they were singing. And then when he moved back to London, he lived in a house across the road from one of the great singing pubs at the time, which had a music hall in the back of it. So he also knew the music hall song tradition as well. But I vividly remember this song that he called A Tree Song. Does have a chorus that when I get there I'll remember it, and you'll hear it too. So it goes like this, but it gives you a good example of the vivid presence of the trees in the songs, in the folklore. Of all the trees that grow so fair, old England to adorn, Greater are none beneath the sun than oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all on a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Oak of the clay lived many a day, or ever Aeneas began. Ash of the loam was a lady at home when Brut was an outlaw man. And Thorn of the Down saw New Troy town, from which was a Londoner born, witnessed by the ancient try of oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all on a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Yew that is old in churchyard mould, he breedeth the mighty bow. Alder for shoes do wise men choose, and beech for cups also. But when you have killed and your bowl it is spilled, and your shoes are clean out worn, then back you must speed for all that you need to oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all on a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Elm she hates mankind and waits till every gust be laid, to drop a limb on the head of him that anyway trusts her shade. Ah, but whether a lad be sober or sad, or mellow with ale from the horn, he'll take it no wrong when he lieth along 'neath oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all on a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Oh, do not tell the priest our plight, he would call it a sin. But we've been out in the woods all night, a conjuring summer in, and we bring you good news by word of mouth, good news for cattle and corn. Now as the sun come up from the south by oak and ash and thorn, sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all on a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Oh, sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all on a midsummer's morn. England shall bide till judgment tide by oak and ash and thorn. Yeah, wonderful. It's a really great thing. I worked on farms. I grew up, I was born in Lincolnshire, up in the Midlands of England, I mean halfway up on the right-hand side, in Gainsborough in Lincolnshire. And then because of my dad's work, we moved down closer to London and lived in North Buckinghamshire, in a town with the, for Americans, I think, pretty funny name of Bletchley. But it then grew into a city as they built all sorts of houses around it to house people whose houses were wiped out during the bombing in World War II. And they moved up there to Bletchley. But the city was called after a little village in the middle of the area called Milton Keynes. And I was sending a telegram once to somebody and on the phone, and I said, you know, it's Milton Keynes. Yeah, said the person doing it, like the poet and the economist, right? I said, yeah, exactly like that. Exactly like that. Well, one of the farms that I worked on had a small hill in the middle of the farm. And it had one tree on it that, as I remember, it was ash. That was in the middle of this hump in the middle, that was right in the middle of the land. And the story was locally that it used to have 3 trees on it, but it was now called One Tree Hill, and it was not an American soap opera, if any of you have seen that. Anyway, the story went that the man who owned all the land around the hill had 3 sons, and when the man died, of course, the land was divided up among the sons. And things being what they were, then the oldest son took the biggest chunk and the best land, and the second son took the next biggest piece, and they left the youngest son the sort of a little bit among the actually the worst soil and the worst land. But they all did their best to make all of these work, and the two big farms were not doing very well. But the youngest son's farm was thriving. And the oldest brother got very upset about this, and he came to the boy, and unfortunately it was right around midsummer, and he said, I saw you up on my hill. That hill's on my property, you know. I don't like to see you up there. And the boy said, I was just continuing Father's tradition of taking wildflowers up and putting them at the foot of each of the trees on Midsummer Eve. And he said, well, I don't want to see you doing that again. And in fact, he said, I've got plans to build a barn. So I'm going to come up and I'm going to cut one of the trees down and use the wood to make my barn. And the youngest son didn't say anything. But the next day, his older brother turned up with a wagon and a bunch of men and horses pulling the wagon. And he took out an axe and he took one swing and bit into the tree, and there was a scream like a woman, but all the horses ran away, and the farmhands ran away, but the older brother kept hacking into the tree, and the wind came up, and every time he hit the tree it screamed and screamed like a woman, and just as it was about to fall down, the wind came up even more, and it blew the tree so it fell down actually on top of the oldest brother and killed him. And the next day, after the middle son had returned from town, he sent a group of men up to fetch the wood and bring the tree down and bring the body of the oldest brother home. And of course the middle boy took all the older brother's land, and the younger son kept living on the little house and the poor land, but kept up the custom of taking flowers up on Midsummer Eve up to the now two trees. And the villagers no longer said that on moonlit nights you could hear dancing on top of the hill, and if you were lucky you could see there used to be 3 green ladies who danced, especially on Midsummer Eve. But now there were only 2, and the music was a lot sadder and slower than it used to be, and they didn't appear in dances as often. But life went on, and the younger boy's land continued to prosper and thrive, and the middle boy's land didn't do nearly as well, even though he had the best ground in the whole farm. And came near Midsummer Eve again, and the younger brother said, I saw you up on the hill this morning. What were you doing? And the younger one said, I was just keeping up Father's tradition of taking flowers up and laying them on Midsummer Eve at the base of the trees. And the middle brother said, well, I don't want to see you up there again. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down one of those trees, and I'm going to put a fence around the hill so you won't be able to get up there at all. And the younger boy said to him, remember what day it is. And the middle brother went on and got an axe and came back, and he hacked into another one of the trees, and this one also screamed like a woman, and he kept hacking away at the tree, and it kept screaming. But he made sure that the direction of the wind was such that he wasn't standing under the tree. So when he actually finally cut the tree down, it didn't fall on top of him, but the third tree was responding to the wind and took one of its branches and hit the middle brother on top of the head and killed him. So the 2 older brothers were now dead, and the youngest boy took the whole farm, but he still kept living in his little house on his small piece of property, and continued to thrive. and he continued to take flowers up there on Midsummer Eve. But they do say now in the village that if you go on moonlit nights, you might see one lady dressed in green doing a very slow, sad dance, and they talk about it being a dangerous place and not a place you should go. So the trees have their own law, which is a little bit like what happened in Tolkien for the Ents, you know, and they have their own personalities, the trees. And I'm going to sing a song from West Dover, Vermont now, perhaps better known as Mount Snow. Mount Snow, of course, dominates West Dover, and West Dover was around. And a lot of you will know of Margaret MacArthur, who lived in Marlborough, Vermont, which is where I first lived. And I actually first moved, my first time in Vermont was when Margaret had heard John Roberts and me singing at Fox Hollow Folk Festival and invited us to come to Thanksgiving in Marlborough at their house, which I then did several Thanksgivings and got to know all of the MacArthurs. And that was in the, mid-1970s. And around 1980, 1981, I was editor of the Journal of the Country Dance and Song Society of America. And Margaret had shown me a book that she had bought many years before when it was first published by Schirmer and Company, that was called Songs from the Hills of Vermont. And she always thought the hills were up here and up further north. And she was, and I'm splashing water everywhere. So, but a friend was visiting her one day who was a local publisher and said, no, you know, come to the window. He took her to the kitchen window, and they looked just north and a little bit west from their house. And he said, you see those houses up there? Those houses are in Dover. And that's where these songs come from. And Margaret, being who she was of course mightily embarrassed that they're neighbors of hers and she didn't even know this. So she went up to West Dover and, of course, as you would do, talked to the postmistress to find out if they still lived in town. And she was informed that no, they were either all dead, and the only one living that the postmistress knew of had moved down to Connecticut. And the man who the songs were originally collected from was a man called James Atwood. And his father and grandfather had learned the songs and brought the songs probably the grandfather was English. Haven't been able to confirm this completely. But James Atwood was a wonderful singer and was also a poet, and wrote, if you like, doggerel poetry about his neighbors. And it's the same kind of poetry that my dad wrote about, doing poems about Albert and the Lion, and sitting in the back of the bus after they'd been to the seaside town of Cleethorpes with the Salvation Army band. There's a famous seaside town called Cleethorpes that's known for fresh air and fun, and they do parodies of those old recitations. So, but James Atwood wrote his own recitations about his neighbors and about places within West Dover, and walks from, for example, West Dover up over to Wilmington. And one of my favorite poems of his, which is about walking home from the church in West Dover to see his lovely wife at lunchtime. And nice poem. But this is one of James Atwood's songs that Margaret actually collected from Fred Atwood. James Atwood never sang it for Margaret, but Margaret had it on a tape with Fred Atwood singing. And what I like about it is it's very much an American song. Barbara Allen is found absolutely everywhere. People speak English. There are over 200 versions in Francis James Child's book, and a lot of them are American and not just English and Irish and others. But this is from Westover, Vermont. This particular version, as sung by Fred Atwood and James Atwood, we know had this song as well. But you'll hear pieces of the supernatural in the flora coming out at the very end. And a lot of you know the story of Barbara Allen, probably. 'Twas in the merry month of May, when all the fields were blooming, a young man on his deathbed lay, for the love of Barbara Allen. He sent his little prentice boy to the place where she was dwelling, saying, "Master says you must come here, if your name be Barbara Allen." So slowly she put on her clothes, and slowly she went to him, and all she said when she came there, "Young man, I think you're dying. For death is sprinkled on your face, and sorrow in your dwelling. Much better off should I be there, if her name be Barbara Allen. Don't you remember the other day, back at the drinking station, you drank a health to the maids all round, and slighted Barbara Allen?" He turned his face unto the wall, his back unto the maiden. "Adieu, adieu to my friends all, and woe to Barbara Allen." She had not gone 3 miles from town. She heard the church bells tolling, and every toll they seemed to roll, "Oh, cruel Barbara Allen." She looked east and she came west. She saw a funeral coming. "Oh, set ye down, ye corpse of clay, that I may look upon him. For cruel is my name," said she, "and cruel is my nature. I might have saved this young man's life by doing my endeavor. The fairest young man in all New York died for John Allen's daughter. The fairest young lady in this town will soon follow after. Go dig my grave both long and deep, go dig it straight and narrow. This young man died for me today, I'll die for him tomorrow." The young man was buried, and she was buried beside him, and out of his grave grew a bright rose red, and out of hers grew a briar. They grew up to the mountain top, till they could grow no higher. They tied in a true lover's knot, and withered away together. Barbara Allen. Yeah, thank you. Okay, probably not a surprise is that there are songs about ghosts. There are many songs about shape change, and I'll do some of those, and so on and so forth. But I knew I had far more songs than I was going to be able to do. And this is one that you'll all be able to sing, and many of you probably know. It's a version of The Cruel Mother. There was a lady in the north, hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, she was courted by her father's clerk, down by the greenwood side, oh, I'll take down the picture a little. He courted her 9 months and a day, Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, until this young man heard it betray. Down by the greenwood side, oh, she leaned her back against an oak. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, and there this young maid's heart was broke. Down by the greenwood side, oh, she leaned her back against the thorn. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, and there two bonny babes she has borne. Down by the greenwood side, oh, then she's taken out her little penknife. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, and there she's taken their sweet lives. Down by the greenwood side, oh, as she looked over her father's wall. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, she spied two bonny boys playing at ball. Down by the greenwood side, oh. Oh, bonny boys, if you were mine. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, I would dress you in silks so fine. Down by the greenwood side, oh. Oh, cruel mother, when we were thine. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, we didn't see none of your silks so fine. Down by the greenwood side, oh. Oh, bonny boys, come tell to me. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, what kind of death I'll have to die. Down by the greenwood side, oh, 7 years a bird in the wood. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, and 7 years a fish in the flood. Down by the greenwood side, oh, oh, welcome, a bird in the wood. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, and welcome, a fish in the flood. Down by the greenwood side, oh, 7 years a tongue in the warning bell. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, and 7 years in the flames of hell. Down by the greenwood side, oh, oh, welcome, a tongue in the warning bell. Hey, the rose and the linsey, oh, but God keep me from the flames of hell. Down by the greenwood side, oh. Yeah, cruel mother. Okay, let's try another ghost song, then we'll change the subject a little. This is a this is from the great state of Maine, really. It's very much of the northern woods, and I'll tell you that little anecdote after I've sung the song, because you'll hear it. It was called the Dreadful Ghost when I learned it. It's of a sailor of whom I write, and let me get the tune. I've got the last tune in my head. It's of a sailor of whom I write, still have that tune. Unto the seas he took, take it up higher, Tony. It's of a sailor of whom I write, unto the seas he took great delight. 2 maidens fair he did beguile, and those 2 maidens he had with child. I go up a little more. Oh, one of them for public shame. Unto some handsome grove she came, and there at length for to end all strife, she took it there, the thread of life. She hung herself down from a tree, and then hung herself down from a tree, where two men a-hunting did her see. They got a knife and cut her down, and on her bosom a note was found. And this was writ in letters large, "Don't bury me, I do you charge, but on the ground there let me lie, that maids may see me as they pass by. Let them take warning by my fate, and cut this folly before it's too late." And while on land she plagued him so, to the seas at length he was forced to go. One morning on the topmast high, a little boat he chanced to spy, a little boat with a large crew of men, and a female ghost who stood up then. Down decks, this young man goes, to greet the captain in his morning clothes. He says, Captain, stand my defense, for I see a spirit coming hence. So up on deck this captain goes, and there he spies this dreadful ghost. She says, Captain, don't tell me so, for he's sailing down in your ship below. And if you don't bring him up to me, a mighty storm you soon shall see, that'll cause both you and your gallant men to weep, and leave you slumbering in the deep. Down decks, this captain goes, and brings this young man up to his foes. And when she fixed her grim eyes on him, it made him tremble in every limb. Oh, don't you remember when I was a maid? You caused my poor trembling heart to bleed. Now I'm a spirit have come for thou. You balked me once, but I've got you now. Down in her boat she forced him, down in her boat she was forced for to go, and as she did we all did admire, for the boat went down in a flame of fire. And as she sank she rose again, and she sang this mournful strain, You sailors all who are left behind, never threw false to womankind. Yeah. There's a bit of a warning. Well, a lot of you will know this one. In the Tower of London, large as life, the ghost of Anne Boleyn walks, they declare. For Anne Boleyn was once King Henry's wife, until he had the headsman bob her hair. Ah, yes, he did her wrong long years ago, but she comes out at night to tell him so, with her head tucked underneath her arm. She walks the bloody tower, with her head tucked underneath her arm at the midnight hour. Along the draughty corridors for miles and miles she goes. She often catches cold, poor thing. It's cold there when it blows, and it's awfully, awfully awkward to have to blow your nose with your head tucked underneath your arm. The sentries think that it's a football that she carries in, and when they've had a few, they shout, Are the Patriots going to win? They think that it's Tom Brady instead of poor old Anne Boleyn, with her head tucked underneath her arm. One night she caught King Henry, he was in the canteen bar. Said he, "Are you Jane Seymour, Anne Boleyn, or Catherine Parr? For how the sweet Saint Fairy Anne do I know who you are? With your head tucked underneath your arm." Yeah, good, we know that one. It's a story that I learned growing up in Lincolnshire, and it was from the county of Yorkshire, the next county north from it, with a lot of moorland on it, and into a particular small rural village, a very interesting looking man with a big mustache came into the village and called himself Mr. Fox. And he clearly was single, because he very quickly set about courting the young single women of the town. He would go and visit them, and this one young woman that we're concerned with, because it's a folk tale, we'll call her Mary. He got to visiting her on Sunday afternoons, and she really liked Mr. Fox. He was basically a lot more interesting than a lot of the farm boys that she basically got to consort with. And he had tales of interesting places that he had traveled, and he clearly knew of many things, and they talked and talked. And one day, Mary said to Mr. Fox, "You know, Mr. Fox, nobody here in town seems to know where you live." And he said, "Well, that's no big secret, Mary. I live in a big house in a clearing in the middle of the woods south of the town." And she said, "Well, Mr. Fox, you know, nobody from this village goes in those woods because they think they're a scary place." And he says, "I've never seen anything scary in those woods. They seem perfectly good to me." But they didn't make a date to meet. And he said, "Yes, sometime you should come and have tea at my house. That would be very nice." And she said, "Yeah, Mr. Fox, I'd actually love that." But they didn't make a date, and it turned into spring, and there were a lot of spring flowers up, as there are here now. And Mary had finished all her chores one particular Sunday afternoon, and she told her three brothers that she was going out picking wildflowers, and what she really wanted to do was daydream. So she went out and picked flowers, and went over here, there's a bunch of primroses over there, and then went over there. And she just was picking flowers a little bit. And before she knew what had happened, she'd actually wandered into the edge of the woods south of town. And she got quite a way into the woods before she stopped, got out of her daydream, and suddenly realized where she was. And she knew there wasn't going to be a problem getting out of the woods, but she thought she would look for a way that was didn't have brush all in it. And she looked, and it seemed like there was a clearing just up there, and she thought, well, there must be a road going north out of the clearing, a walkway, a path. And so she made her way over to the clearing and looked down the end of the clearing, and there was a big old house, you know, this sort of Tudor style house with wood and bricks in the walls. And she thought, must be Mr. Fox's house. So she thought, looking at the sun, it's about tea time, so I'll just go and see if Mr. Fox is in, and we could have some tea. So she wanders down to the house, and she wanders up the steps to the big old main door, you know, which had iron braces along it, and she knocks on the door, and it echoed inside of it. Nobody came to the door, and she was a bit disappointed because she didn't get to go in houses like this very much, you know, and it looked a lot more interesting than where she lived. And so she went along and found a window she could peek in on tiptoe, and it was just a library, and found another window, and that was just a living room, but she really wanted to go inside. So she went back up to the steps, and as she was walking up the steps this time, something caught her attention, and it was writing carved in the lintel above the front door, and the words said, "Be bold, be bold." And she thought that was a bit of a funny welcome. But anyway, she went to the door and turned the door, and being a folk tale, of course, it creaked. Right, and she opened the door and looked in, and still nobody was there. Then she thought, I have to go in and look. And what caught her attention from the doorway, of course, was a staircase. Wonderful looking staircase with great wide carpet on it. And so she went walking over to the staircase and walked up the staircase, just imagining herself in a ball gown, like sort of the sort that she'd never worn and she didn't own, but she could, more or less hear it just swishing up the stairs as she went up. And she got onto a landing, really, that had windows that looked out on the clearing. But down the end here was another door that clearly had some more writing carved in the lintel above it. And she just couldn't resist. So she walked down, and this door, the words said, be bold, but not too bold." So she reached down for the handle and she turned it and pushed the door open. And it was just a bedroom, and she assumed it was Mr. Fox's bedroom. A bit disappointing, really, and she looked around. There was just the usual toiletries, a bowl for washing your face and brushing your teeth, if they did that then. And but what really caught her attention was another door on the other side of the room, and it looked like there was more writing above it. So she walked over to it, and this time the words said, be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold." So she reached down and she turned the handle and pushed the door open. And she was a bit disappointed because it was dark inside. And she pushed the door open a little more, and as her eyes go used to the dark, she could see there were 3 containers, what looked like, we think of as bathtubs, really. And she went to the first one, and it was filled with bones, and they were clearly human bones. And she went to the second one, and they were filled with long hair, and it was clearly female hair. And she went to the third one, and it was filled with a dark liquid, and she put her finger in and tasted it. It was blood. So she thought she probably didn't belong there. And she closed the door, and she walked out through the bedroom, and she walked over to that door and closed the door quietly, make sure she hadn't touched anything. And just as she walked onto the landing, in the clearing, coming out of the woods into the clearing, she saw Mr. Fox coming towards the house, and he was dragging a young woman. She thought she recognized the clothes, that it was one of the young women from the village. And Mr. Fox just kept striding along, dragging the young woman behind him. And Mary thought, what am I going to do now? And just at the last minute, before the front door was flung open, she rushed down the stairs and turned around the stairs and pressed herself up against the staircase, and the front door was flung open, and Mr. Fox came in, dragging the young woman, and he dragged her upstairs, and halfway up, the young woman reached out and grabbed onto the banister, and without breaking stride, Mr. Fox pulled out his sword, hacked off her hand at the wrist, and went up onto the balcony and went down and through the next door, and everything was then quiet. Well, the hand had dropped into the lap of Mary, who was pressed alongside, so she picked it up and took it with her, and she didn't stop running until she got home. So she rushed north from the clearing up through the woods, and Sunday came, and Mr. Fox came to visit, as he usually did. And she made sure all 3 of her brothers were home this time. And conversation was a bit slow. And so Mr. Fox said, Mary, you're not as talkative as usual. Are you not well? Is something the matter? She said, well, Mr. Fox, I've been having the most terrible dreams. He said, well, you know, I've traveled in many places and I can read dreams, and perhaps if you tell me the dreams, I could read them for you. And she said, well, Mr. Fox, I dreamed that I was out picking flowers, and I ended up walking into the woods south of the town, and I kept going, and I walked into a clearing in the middle of the woods. And Mr. Fox said, but surely it was not so. And she said, well, Mr. Fox, I dreamed that then I went up to the house and walked up the steps and up to the front door, and there were words carved in the lintel above the front door, and the words said, be bold, be bold. And Mr. Fox said, but surely it was not so. And she said, well, then, Mr. Fox, I went in and I walked up through to a staircase to another door, which seemed like there was a bedroom inside, but there were more words above the door. And the words said, be bold, but not too bold. And Mr. Fox said, but surely it was not so and is not so. Well, she said, then, Mr. Fox, I dreamed I went in that room and there was another door with more words. Be bold, but not too bold, lest that your heart's blood should run cold. And Mr. Fox said, but surely it was not so, is not so. And she said, well, there, inside there were 3 bathtubs, one filled with bones and one filled with, female hair, and then one filled with blood. And Mr. Fox by now was on his feet. He'd said, but surely it was not so and is not so, and God forbid it should be so. And she took out the hand from under the table and threw it on his plate and said, but Mr. Fox, it was so, and it is so, and here's the very hand to show. And her 3 brothers took him outside and cut him to pieces. There you go. So, yeah, okay. Well, Margaret MacArthur used to sing another one of the Atwoods songs that was called Reynardine. And Reynard, as I'm sure you know, is the French word for fox. And versions of this song are found all over Europe. There are some in Britain, not many, and there are some in this country, not many. But here in Vermont, we have 2 different versions of Reynardine. Who knows why? But anyway, this is from Fred Atwood and the Atwoods. And Margaret, at some point after she had moved north and was singing this song, she was sent a clipping. She had spent some time in her childhood in Kentucky. And she was sent a newspaper clipping by someone who was a friend who lived there, and sent this clipping, and it was a story about a court case for molestation by a man, the sort of country rake, if you like, of the village, and he had molested a young woman, and the judge asked him to explain himself, and the man said, well, Judge, Your Honor, I really ought to do it with a southern accent, but I can't. So he said, well, Judge, Your Honor, I just sang her a verse of Reynardine, and she sprung up on her hind legs like a stallion. And the judge said, case dismissed. One evening as I rambled 2 miles below Pomeroy, I met a farmer's daughter all on the mountains high. I said, my pretty fair maiden, your beauty shines most clear, and on this lonely mountain I'm glad to meet you here. Sing that. I'm glad to meet you here. I'm glad to meet you here. And on this lonely mountain, I'm glad to meet you here. She said, young man, be civil, my company forsake, for to my great opinion, I fear you are a rake. And if my parents came to know, my life they would destroy, for keeping of your company, all on the mountains high, all on the mountains high, all on the mountains high, for keeping of your company, all on the mountains high. This pretty little thing, she fell into a maze, with eyes as bright as amber upon me he did gaze. As her ruby lips and pearly cheeks, they lost their former dye, and then she fell into his arms, all on the mountains high, all on the mountains high, all on the mountains high, and then she fell into his arms, all on the mountains high. I had but kissed her once or twice when she came to again, and modestly she said to me, "Pray, sir, what is your name? If you go to yonder forest, my castle there you'll find. 'Tis wrote in ancient history, my name is Reynardine. My name is Reynardine. My name is Reynardine. 'Tis wrote in ancient history, my name is Reynardine." He said, "My dearest maiden, don't let your parents know, for if you do, they'll cause my ruin and fatal overthrow. But when you come to look for me, perhaps you'll not me find. I'll be in my castle, enquire for Reynardine, enquire for Reynardine, enquire for Reynardine. I'll be in my castle, enquire for Reynardine." Now all you pretty fair maidens, take my advice from me. Don't be sure you quit night walking and shun bad company, for if you do, you'll surely rue until the day you die. And beware of meeting Reynardine, all on the mountains high, all on the mountains high, all on the mountains high. Beware of meeting Reynardine, all on the mountains high. All right, there you go. Now, one thing I wanted to tell you about, John Roberts and I did record a lot of these supernatural songs, and we have an album called Dark Ships in the Forest. And if you're looking for something for your favorite aunt for Christmas, I do have some with me. And I also have a CD that I just recorded with Keith Murphy, who is a neighbor of mine, right across the road from our house, and we recorded all of these Atwood songs, most of them, and there will be a second CD, I think, coming out with it. So I do have some copies of those there with me, and I see I'm quickly running out of time. Tons more songs, and so if you wanted to get Dark Ships in the Forest, that would help. I did, very quickly, I'll tell you about Michael did ask me to talk a little bit about a class I used to teach at Boston University called Stalking the Wild Mind. And you'll remember the book about the wild asparagus. Well, I used to teach aesthetics and as a perception psychologist about how one looks at, listens to, and so on, what one's relationship is to art. And it was clear that none of the basic approaches to psychology were going to be useful at all in talking about art. And so when I first started teaching at Marlborough College, I was teaching a course with John Roberts and another friend from Cornell, whose name was Tom Tolino, that was called Stalking the Wild Artist. And then I made an amazing discovery, which is that I was a very good natural dowser. Some friends introduced me to this, and I realized this is bigger than art, folks. It's actually, so the course became Stalking the Wild Mind. And it was a way of approaching how you approach these phenomena so that they're not supernatural, but they're in fact natural. We just don't know yet how to describe them. I mean, we have the sort of 5 senses that we learn about in elementary school, but there are many other things that we can do. And I had an aunt who, if she hadn't been a Salvation Army priest, would have been a witch. Because she was a captain in the Salvation Army, always wore her uniform, but on her left lapel, always had behind the lapel a darning needle with a piece of thread on it. And growing up a little boy, I thought that was for emergency sewing. Oh, isn't that nice? She does emergency sewing. But I later learned that what she did was when she went around doing her visits, her pastoral visits, she would douse the sex of people's babies by holding the darning needle on a thread like a pendulum. She called it pendling. You know, not surprising, people now do. And she would hold it, and she claims that she was never wrong. And depending on which way it went, she could tell whether it was going to be a boy or a girl. But I want to tell you one quick story that I discovered when I was 18 and had just been part of an extra for filming that was done by a man called Peter Watkins of the BBC. And the filming was done on Culloden Moor up in Inverness, and it's the last great battle fought on British soil. Probably was the Battle of Culloden, Bonnie Prince Charlie. It was that fight. And anyway, so I had been up there and hitchhiking, trying to hitchhike back home. I was in Edinburgh and absolutely basically got stuck in Edinburgh for hours, and nobody would pick me up. And at the last minute, I got a ride from some people who were going as far as Doncaster in Yorkshire, which was basically halfway home. And I thought, well, that's halfway home. And I had spent many days in Doncaster as a quite young boy and as a teenager, because turns out that a lot of my cousins did too, and I didn't know this for a long time. But I used to go and stay with my Aunt Elizabeth, who was my mother's oldest sister, and her husband, Sidney Tester, bless you. And I would go stay with them and knew how to get around Doncaster. It wasn't as easy making phone calls as it is now, right? Nobody had cell phones. In fact, when I finally reached a phone, which was when I got to Doncaster, I called their number and they weren't home. So I got on the correct bus and I went up to where they lived. That was right, they weren't home, and they had to have been at some Salvation Army meeting or other, because my aunt was, the minister, if you like, or the pastor, and my uncle was a big wig in the Salvation Army insurance company. So they were obviously at some meeting, but I'd been there many, many times and knew the neighbors. So I went and knocked on one of the neighbors' doors, and they recognized me and had me come in and, have some tea until, your aunt and uncle come back. Meanwhile, back at the Salvation Army Citadel, my Aunt Bet turns to her husband, Sidney, and says, "Tony's at the house." And he was clearly used to this and said, "Okay, let's go." So they left and got in their car and drove back home. And when they got to their house, I had left my rucksack, of course, by the front door. And so my Aunt Bet went in and started to get food together. And they knew what I would have done, and they sent him next door to the neighbors to go and fetch me. And when he came, he told me this story of how Aunt Bet had suddenly turned to him, however long ago it was, and said, "Tony's at the house." So they came home. And it turned out then, asking my family about this, that it happened all the time. That a lot of my family, particularly, here's a surprise, a lot of the women in my family had this same insight or foresight. And so I taught this, and one of the things I did was tell a story like that in many of these songs and so on, and ask my students, and I got many students who had had interesting things happen to them, ghosts in the house or odd phenomena happen, that they hadn't been able to talk about to anybody. And this class was a safe place for them to talk about with it. But I'm going to finish with one little song that I used to sing for them, because one of the things that we did was with dowsing, you could do with various dowsing tools, was douse people's aura. And if we had a little more time, I could show you how it works. But there are basically 3 levels of aura outside of the body, and you can douse all 3 of them, whatever your favorite dowsing tool is. So the song I'll finish with is this. Thank you very much. When we're singing on choruses too, goes like this. I've done lots of spiritual healing. I'm in touch with all my feelings. I've read palms and read the stars for kings and queens. And I hate to bum you out, but you have without a doubt the ugliest aura that this poor boy's ever seen. Chorus. I can see your aura and it's ugly. Your spirit must be rotten to the core. And for a new age guy like me, it just brings pain and misery. So dear, I cannot love you anymore. In some life you had before, you murdered people by the score. Your evil is so totally complete. All good in you is gone. There is darkness with no dawn. Either that or you are eating too much meat. For I can see your aura and it's ugly. Your spirit must be rotten to the core. And to a new age guy like me, it just brings pain and misery. So dear, I cannot love you anymore. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. One more. We got time. My wife says, we have to go. I've got to teach first grade tomorrow. So I've got to get up. Oh, one more. Then she gets the hook. Okay. One more. Let's do this one then. An outlandish knight came from the Northland. He came a-wooing of me. He said he would take me into the Northland, and there his bride I would be, and there his bride I would be. Go fetch me some of your father's gold, and some of your mother's fee, and 2 of the best nags that are in the stable, where there stand 30 and 3, where there stand 30 and 3. So she's fetched him some of her father's gold, and some of her mother's fee, and 2 of the best nags that were in the stable, where there stood 30 and 3, where there stood 30 and 3. She's mounted up on the milk-white steed, him on the dapple grey. They rode till they came to the banks of the sea, 6 hours before it was day. 6 hours before it was day. Dismount, dismount, my pretty fair maid. Deliver your steed unto me. For it's 6 pretty maidens I have drowned here, and thou the 7th shall be, and thou the 7th shall be. Take off that fine silken gown, deliver it up unto me, for I think it a shame that a garment so fine should ripple all in the salt sea, should ripple all in the salt sea. Well, if I must take off my fine silken gown, turn your back upon me, for I think it a shame that a villain like you a naked woman should see, a naked woman should see. So he's turned his back on that pretty fair maid, he's viewed the hills with great glee. She grabbed him around the middle so small, and she's keltered him into the sea. She's keltered him into the sea. He tumbled high, he tumbled low, till he came to the banks of the sea. Take hold of my hand, you pretty fair maid, and then I will marry thee, and then I will marry thee. Lie there, you false-hearted man, lie there instead of me. For if 6 pretty maidens you have drowned here, then thou the 7th shall be, then thou the 7th shall be. She's mounted up on the milk-white steed, she's led the dapple grey. She rode till she came to her father's own hall, 3 hours before it was day, 3 hours before it was day. Now her parrot hung up in the window so high, and seeing the lady come in, he swung to the left and he swung to the right, and then he began to sing, and then he began to sing. Don't prattle, my pretty Polly, don't tell no tales upon me, and your cage shall be made of the glittering gold, and your perch of the best ebony, your perch of the best ebony. The Outlandish Night. There you go. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.